we'll continue this next week. And Jennifer will send out the note on Monday. Obviously, we couldn't send out the note till yesterday to remind everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Wednesday study session as we pick different Jewish topics the week ahead or sometimes several weeks ahead. Obviously, the high holiday just have completed, at least Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, so we're all a little tired, a little behind. But we, a couple of weeks ago, we were doing Jewish authors and it was really quite successful. So we're going to continue a little bit of that today. It'll be a shorter one as we start a little late and we're all getting together and hopefully we have some really interesting Jewish authors. So we'll continue it again next week. You just mentioned how many Jewish authors have won Nobel Prizes. It's really quite incredible. Apparently there was another one I was reading about who won a Nobel Prize, but he was in the Soviet Union and they refused to allow him to accept it. So, so that would have been, you know, another person. What was his name? Let's see if I can look up his name. Let's see here. That is not where it is. Okay, I'll have to look up later. So, thank you. We guess so. Sid and Harriet, we're working on getting these guys and their alligator on board.
She can hear you, obviously.
Can you hear? I guess you can hear us, Harriet. Harriet, you are now on mute. You are on mute, so I'll ask you to unmute, but I can't unmute you. And it's kind of like, what's the movie Ghost? There's this love affair, but he's a ghost. There we go.
Irina said to apologize, but she had a doctor's appointment this morning.
I hope
and
it
she's
goes.
Sorry that you got to send out the notice about the meeting.
Well, we'll continue this topic next week because I'm not sure if everybody, and remind everybody what they're doing and then see if anybody wants to choose news books. Last time I thought was just an absolutely fabulous session. I learned a lot. So this week, does anybody have any authors? I know we had, see who here. Judy, we didn't know what you were going to do, but you wanted to do something. Yeah. Michael, you had Bernard Malamud, and Stuart, you had Thomas Friedman, obviously many of our friends. Karen, who's not on, but hopefully next week, had Philip Roth. Jeff had Isaac Asimov. And Jennifer says we should definitely add Ania Diamond, which is on the list to be added anyway. And Elie Wiesel, who we've already done.
And Isaac Singer.
Isaac Singer is supposed to be today. Supposed to be. Jennifer's very excited. So Stuart, you want to give us a little bit? So we'll go to Judy first, and then we'll go to Stuart, and then we'll go to Michael. It goes by whoever raised their hands.
Okay. Well, I was originally doing Leon Uris, but I know Rena did that last week. So I'm doing Herman Wouk. Actually, it says it, I always thought it was Wouk, but it says it rhymes with rook, like in pawn, like in chess. So yeah, so it's Wouk. I'm having a hard time because I always said it wrong. So it's
you think you would have changed it to something that was a little easier to pronounce?
I know. Anyway, he was born in 1915 and passed away in May of 2019. So he lived to 104.
I didn't realize he was still living.
Wrote his last book at 100. He's a pretty amazing man. And I had read many of his books, but he was a really, really Jewish author. And many of his books were about Judaism and even Orthodox Judaism. So he's an American author, obviously best known for historical fiction like The Caine Mutiny. And he did not win a Nobel Prize, but for Caine Mutiny in 1951, he won the Pulitzer. So that's pretty impressive. And his other major works were, of course, the war stories, Winds of War and War of Remembrance, historical novels about World War II. He was born in the Bronx, and his parents were Esther Levine and Abraham Isaac Wouk. I have trouble with that. They were Russian Jewish immigrants coming from what today would be Belarus, so he's probably related to most of us. And his father toiled, it said, for many years to raise the family out of poverty, and eventually had a successful laundry business and did well. As a child, Wouk told Time magazine, he said he was the neighborhood fat boy, forever being clobbered by street toughs. And he found comfort in books that his mother got him. In particular, he loved Mark Twain because he could make people laugh. So when he was 13, his maternal grandfather, Mendel Lieb Levine, came from Minsk to live with them, and he took charge of his Jewish education. And he said his father told him, he said, if I had just one breath left in my body to tell you, I would tell you study the Talmud. And he took this advice to heart. So he really was a religious Jew for most of his life. And Judaism was integral to both his career and his personal life. And he said later that his grandfather and his time in the US Navy were the two most important influences on his life. So he was a very smart young man, and he earned a place at a accelerated public institution in Manhattan called the Townsend Harris School, and was for gifted students. And then he went to Columbia. He graduated at the age of 19, and he majored in comparative literature and philosophy. And at that time, he studied with a philosopher there who kind of led him away from Orthodox Judaism, which many of us do in college. And that was for a short time. And he was a member, I never heard of this, Pi Lambda Phi fraternity. I don't know that as a Jewish house, but I don't know that house. And he was editor of Columbia's humor magazine, the Columbia Jester, and wrote 2 of its actual annual variety shows. When he graduated, he became a radio dramatist. He worked for something called David Friedman's Joke Factory. And in 36, he became a staff writer for radio comedian Fred Allen.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
And this is great. One of his duties there was to rustle up oddballs like a goldfish doctor or a worm salesman, because they had a segment called People You Didn't Expect to Meet. So, anyway, they said at the time he was earning about $500, which would be about $9,000 today, which was during the Depression, a very impressive salary. And in 1941, he actually worked for the US government. He wrote radio spots to sell war bonds. So a very interesting background. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, he joined the US Naval Reserve and served in the Pacific Theater during World War II. And he said, I learned how men behaved under pressure, and I learned a lot about Americans. And he served on 2 destroyer minesweepers, and he actually was the executive officer. He was a lieutenant. And he was in 6 invasions and won a number of battle stars. And while he was on board ship, he started to write a novel called Aurora Dawn. And he sent it to his old philosophy professor, who sent it to a New York editor. And by the time the ship got to Okinawa, he had a contract for a book. And that first book became a Book of the Month Club main selection. So that's quite a thing right out of the gate. His second novel, one I've read called City Boy, I don't know if anybody read that. I remember it's been a long time. It was a commercial disappointment. It said that was published in 1948. But 51 was his greatest, or one of his greatest. That was when he published The Caine Mutiny. And it drew from his wartime experiences on the minesweepers. It was, as we know, a drama on the high seas leading up to a riveting courtroom scene. It introduced readers to the unforgettable Captain Philip F. Queeg, who was they call a seething blend of paranoia and incompetence, constantly fiddling anxiously with 2 steel ball bearings in his left hand. And when he steers the ship towards certain disaster in a typhoon, his junior officers remove him from command, and they later face court-martial. The book sold more than 3 million copies in the US alone, won the Pulitzer Prize in 1952, and was made into a movie with Humphrey Bogart as Queeg. And then Mr. Woke adapted the courtroom sessions into a Broadway play called The Caine Mutiny Court Martial. And that opened the same year as the film, with Lloyd Nolan in the starring role. Now, he actually had written for Broadway before. He had a play called The Traitor, about a scientist who gives atomic secrets to the Soviets. That was in 1949. And then he had what they call the forgettable comedy, Nature's Way, in 1957. So after The Caine Mutiny, his next book was Marjorie Morningstar. And of course, we talked about that even in class before. It earned him a cover story on Time magazine, and it took him back to his Orthodox Jewish faith. So this book, as we know, was about a young woman Jewish woman who dreams of being an actress and eventually settles into life as a suburban housewife. And it explores how Jews struggle to reconcile their faith with American society. And it wasn't acclaimed by the critics, but people loved it. And they say it helped to broaden interest in Jewish American novels later that decade by Philip Roth, who we'll hear about. His sympathy for the middle-class virtues led Time magazine to call him a Sinclair Lewis in reverse. The Times reviewer, Maxwell Geismar, shrewdly focused on the drama as a drama of Jewish assimilation, the tragic comic meeting of traditional Jewish culture and the American success myth. And of course, it became a famous movie with Natalie Wood and Gene Kelly. Next, he had slew of books, Slattery's Hurricane, his first book of nonfiction called This Is My God, The Jewish Way of Life, Youngblood Hawk, Don't Start the Carnival, a book called Caribbean. Youngblood Hawk was made actually into a serial with James Franciscus and Suzanne Plachette. And this other Caribbean thing called Don't Stop the Carnival, Jimmy Buffett turned it into a musical, but I never heard about that. That was in 1997. In the 70s, he published his two monumental novels, The Winds of War and War and Remembrance, a devastating depiction of the Holocaust. And he said it was the main tale that I have to tell. Both were made into successful TV miniseries in 1983 and then 1988. And they both starred Robert Mitchum as the main character. The novels are historical fiction, and each had three layers. It was very interesting. The story was told by Captain Henry, who was the Robert Mitchum character, and his circle of family and friends. And it was basically a historical account of the events of the war. And then second was this basic account of the war. And then third was an analysis by a member of Hitler's military staff. So they were actually very, very deep. He said he did 13 years of extraordinary research and long, arduous composition to promote these two books. And apparently there are hundreds of boxes of notes at Columbia University, if anybody's interested in research. He followed that up with Inside Outside, which is a story of 4 generations of a Russian Jewish family and its travails in Russia, the US, and Israel. And then he wrote 2 books that I had enjoyed, The Hope and the Glory, historical novels about the first 33 years of Israel's history. And then followed that with The Will to Live On Our Heritage, which is a whirlwind tour of Jewish history and sacred texts. He was honored by the Library of Congress for his 80th birthday. They called him, they said, he cherished his privacy, and he was the reclusive dean of American historical novelists. And Washington Post said he was an American Tolstoy. And then a couple more books coming up after that. And did a story about Hollywood, about the writer of a script called Moses. Then for his 100th birthday, he wrote a memoir entitled Sailor and Fiddler, Reflections of a 100-Year-Old Author. And NPR radio called it a lovely coda to the career of a man who made a kinder, smarter, better place. And that, of course, was his last book. In 2012, there was a ceremony for him at the Library of Congress, and they gave him the first Library of Congress Lifetime Achievement Award for writing of fiction. So another milestone. Interesting, his wife was named Betty Brown. He met her in California during the war when his ship was in dock for repairs. She was a Phi Beta graduate of the University of South Carolina, and they fell in love, and she was born a Protestant and raised in Idaho, but she began her study of Judaism and converted on her 25th birthday. And she began to use the name Sarah, and that's how she was known throughout her life, as Sarah after that. And then they had 3 children. One was tragically lost in a drowning accident, but he had 2 others, one at Princeton, who graduated Princeton and is also an author, and the other sounds very interesting. He's a Columbia graduate, attorney, film producer, and he served in the Israeli Navy. So And he has had
Impressive
3
children.
grandchildren. Huh?
Impressive
Yeah.
children, obviously.
Yeah, he's interesting. Anyway, he passed away in May of 2019 in Palm Springs, California, 10 days shy of his 104th birthday. And he not only graduated from Columbia, but he also had honorary doctorates from Yeshiva, Clark, American International College, and Bar-Ilan in Ramat Gan. And he won just a slew of prizes in addition to the Pulitzer. So the very interesting man. And I know for myself, it kind of rekindled interest. I'm going to try to reread some of these books, particularly Winds of War, because I remember loving that. Maybe I'll just watch the miniseries. I don't know. So that's a little easier.
I recommend The Hope and Glory to anyone who's going through conversion on the section on Israel. It's just, especially The Hope, it's so well written.
Yeah,
But any of you guys ever watch Cheers, the
sure.
TV show? I remember there was an episode, and again, I remember I was young, where Sam wanted to show he could be smart and read a whole book. He picked the greatest book ever written, War and Remembrance. And he kept
Oh, yeah.
wanting to talk about it. At the very end of the episode, he finds out there's actually a movie about it. He's like, I could have watched a movie. I could have watched a movie.
Yeah, there you go.
Well,
Interesting.
thank you so much, Judy, for doing that. Is a great. And again, he is, even though none of us can pronounce his name correctly, apparently, that he is
Yeah.
and
Oh,
I didn't realize he was already well into his 80s when he wrote The Hope and Glory, because that was in the 90s, I think. So
Hope and Glory. I think
yeah, so
yeah, interesting. Yeah, he was very interesting. I'm kind of glad I got to do this because he was a very interesting man.
and also somebody who really, although stayed very
right.
Jewish, his books really, again, transcended Judaism and was able to really go, especially the 3 famous ones, Cain Mutiny and The Winds of War and The War and Remembrance, kind of became, even though there's some Judaism in them, obviously, but they became very popular outside.
Yeah, Robert, you're right. Hope was 1993 and Glory 1994. So they were pretty recent books.
It's interesting that his 3 probably best known books, Cain Mutiny, War and Remembrance, and Winds of War, all had a very central Jewish character in them.
Mhm.
So he represented Judaism very well, I think, even in his novels.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much, Judy. And so we'll go to Stuart. And Stuart, who do you have for us?
Thomas Friedman,
Mm.
which is that is different in terms of writings and whatnot. It's kind of character as you can get. And I had some remembrances of Thomas Friedman, which turned out all to be wrong. I must have been confusing him with someone else because I thought he was born in Brooklyn and he was born in Minnesota. So
He was born in Minnesota?
yes.
Really? I've never heard him speak. I've never heard him speak. I've, of course, read several of his novels. Does he have an accent?
He was born in St. Louis Park, Minnesota in 1953. So he's currently
That's outside of Minneapolis. Yeah.
I really think of him more of like a, New York guy, because obviously
So did I.
he- The Times and
so
holy cow.
I was surprised.
There's a lot of Jews in Minnesota,
Yeah.
Oh yes, there's a big
especially
community.
in Hennepin. That's like a place.
Yeah.
Actually, our JCC director left to go to Edina, we say Minnesota. We were like, what are you going to do there? And he's like, there's lots of Jews there. So we're like, okay.
Interestingly, one of the websites about him talks about his college and has him going to St. Francis College. And so, that doesn't sound right. And it was when he was studying in England, and that was the college in Cambridge that he went to. But actually, he was graduated from Brandeis, which is, I guess, something one would expect a little more. Lives with his wife and 2 kids, author of 13 books, all nonfiction, and is currently the final foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times. He's been in that position for over 20 years. He's been with the Times much longer than that. And his degree from Brandeis was in Mediterranean studies. So it's very interesting, but he also spent several semesters abroad when he studied University of Minnesota, then went to Brandeis and spent several summers abroad while as an undergraduate at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So he comes by it fairly honestly. Very much involved in foreign affairs, as you know, global trade, economics. Those are sort of his areas. His first assignment, really, out of school, he ended up living in Beirut for 2 years as a journalist. And it was then that he went to the New York Times, but that generated his first book, which is still a pretty big hit in 1989, called From Beirut to Jerusalem. And that really, I think, started his real interest in the Middle East and in foreign affairs. Journalism was probably really his second choice of career. What he wanted to be primarily was a professional golfer. Very much interested in it, and still holds a handicap of 7. To put that into perspective, mine is about 23. So he would certainly pin my ears back. He's best known, I think, for his book, The World is Flat, and also for his very usual appearances on CNN and other news programs for his analysis. World is Flat and Hot, Flat, and Crowded, which he followed it with in 2008, both about the integration of markets around the world. And the premise is that largely because of computers and other technologies, things have moved so fast that you no longer can be in a position to try to be isolationist. No matter what your natural resources are, you can no longer live alone. But the world has become, like it or not, one global community. And if the world is to survive, we and everyone else better learn to live in that situation. I think that's really sums up his whole kind of philosophy. It doesn't, however, preclude his Judaism. He is very much a Jew, and I'll touch on that in just a little bit. He's got a whole bunch of books that he's written. Thank You for Being Late is another one talking about how, as in a very optimistic book, which is not so common in his genre these days, about how fast the world is accelerating, and that's good, but we need to accommodate it to it. Lexus and the Olive Tree in 1999, and on through 13 books and 3 Pulitzer Prizes. In Alexis and the Olive Tree, this acceleration he talks about, he says what we really have to do, and I think it sums up his view in large sense, is in order to survive in this world, we have to be fast, fair, and slow. We have to be fast because we have to be quick to adapt. Things are changing so fast. We have to be fair because people are going to be left behind because of the speed, and we have to take care of them. To me, that's a very Jewish Talmudic view. And we have to be slow. We have to be able to shut out all of the noise around us and get back to and keep our own values. And boy, to me, that could be right out of Pirkei Avot, and perhaps it is. He was asked, what does, quote, I am Jewish, unquote, that phrase mean to you? That question was inspired, I'm sure all of you are familiar with Daniel Pearl. Those were Pearl's last words. And I'd like to read to you, to give you a real impression of who Thomas Friedman is, his response to that. For me, the phrase I am Jewish means a very important part of my identity, but not the only part of my identity. I see myself as American, as a journalist, a New York Times columnist, a husband, a father, a man of the world, a Jew. The last is by no means the least. My faith defines not only the pathway I choose to connect to God, but also, just as important, a big part of my cultural and communal root system. Being Jewish is a big part of my olive tree, the thing that anchors me in the world, but it is not my only root. Being an American also is very much a part of my olive tree. American Jew, Jewish American, American Jewish writer for the New York Times. It doesn't matter how you put it. They all capture me. They all are important. They all locate me where I have been and where I am going. This one really resonates to me, especially in looking back to the idea that his education, Jewish education, was largely the same as mine. Secular school and 5 days a week at Hebrew school after school. And I see Michael responding to that.
Oh, yeah, I do as well.
Right? Not yeshiva bachas. And I think that's very much reflected in his view that Judaism is an incredibly important part of his thinking, his writing, and his persona, but it is moderated and tempered by many other factors.
Thank you, Stuart. That was amazing. Of course, a little different is he's much more a contemporary. Is really his career started in the 80s and 90s, really became famous. So it's nice that we get this wide range, that the chain fence continues from obviously the Russian writers all the way through to the Israeli and American writers today, maybe even a European here and there. Michael, we'd like to finish with you today.
Hey, well, you know, I'm going to talk about Bernard Malamud, who in many ways is the opposite of Mr. Wu. Did I say it right?
Woke.
Woke. Well, woke means something else too. If you didn't know, woke means like you're really hip. You're like in tune with what's going on, which when you ask what woke means, it shows you that you are not woke. So I guess he's in tune with everything.
Well, you know, and to, you know, kind of compliment what Stuart said, I was going to start with a quote from Malamud, which is, "I'm an American, I'm a Jew, and I write for all men," which will be interesting as I go forward. He was born in Brooklyn in 1914. He was the son. He was the son of Russian immigrants, Bertha and Max, and he had a brother who was born and suffered from mental illness, born 3 years later, and had mental illness his whole life, and tragically, you know, died very young. I think committed suicide in his, well, not that young, in his 50s, but anyway, he, you know, was a product of the Depression. His family was very, very poor, and his father, you know, was barely literate in English, and Malamud always thought that he was inept in trying, in, you know, getting, you know, resources to the family. And his mother was also mentally ill. And, you know, she died when he was 15. And the last time he saw her was, you know, she was waving to him through bars of a mental institution. And he wasn't allowed to visit her. And, you know, that led him to really try to help his brother, who suffered the same illness. But, you know, that wasn't very successful. And I don't remember Stewart, but he attended Erasmus High School. Yes?
Yeah,
Okay.
everyone famous from New York attended Erasmus High School.
And so he was very fond as a child of Charlie Chaplin movies. After high school, he worked for $4.50 a day as a teacher in training before he attended college. He got a government loan, and he went to CCNY in 1936. In 1942, he obtained a master's degree from Columbia. And his thesis was on Thomas Hardy. You don't remember Thomas Hardy from school? He was a British author who most of us did not like reading. But his name has come up a lot lately in my life. I don't know why. His father was a widower at the time, and that was enough to get him out of military service during World War II. He worked for the Census Bureau in DC, and then after the war, he taught English. You know, during this period, he met his wife, whose name was Anne de Chiara. She was an Italian American, a Roman Catholic, and as you might guess, both families objected to the marriage, but it endured for, you know, the rest of his life. Now, in terms of his Jewishness, he never wanted to discuss it. He said he was always faithful to his heritage and his Jewish identity, but he never discussed whether he was observant, which I suspect he wasn't. And at the same time, his writings were very Jewish. They were always based on how would a Jew react. Before I talk about some of his writings, he died in 1986, and he's buried, and this is kind of an aside, he was buried at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Has anybody ever been there? No. If you ever go to Boston, you need to go there. It's like taking a walk through a park, and you climb up and you get these panoramic views, and a lot of famous people are buried there. Felix Frankfurter was buried there, and several other authors. It's really quite a place, and I'll just, as an aside, you can get parking around there. At least I was able to, and I don't think it was because my daughter had a Cambridge parking sticker. So anyway, his tombstone there is written in Hebrew. It's a very short tombstone, just a year date, and then in Hebrew it just says Master of Stories. So, and that tells me maybe he wasn't, you know, very religious, unlike Woke or Friedman. Okay. Well, he started writing, and you know, his first, which I think is interesting, his first literary agent was a man named Maxim Lieber, who was implicated by Whittaker Chambers, and he left the country right after that. So I don't know who his subsequent literary agent was. But anyway, in 1949, he moved to Corvallis, Oregon, and he became a lecturer at Oregon State, and he stayed there until 1961. He could only teach writing because he didn't have a PhD. They wouldn't let him teach literature courses. But he and his wife made a life there, and in 1961, he moved back east to Bennington College in Vermont. His children describe him as an affectionate father, and he didn't play sports with the kids. He kept writing. That was his thing. But he certainly made time for them, and he was just driven by a desire to give his children opportunities that he didn't have as a child. He said in later years, we were sort of dubbed the family that was supposed to be better than the first. He wouldn't talk about his family or his past. So anyway, one of his children wrote a book and disclosed that after he moved to Bennington, he started having an affair with one of his students, which would never happen I shouldn't say it wouldn't happen today, but Bennington College practically encouraged these things to happen between students and faculty. And it sort of wasn't a secret, and his wife accepted it, and the affair lasted for 20 years, and his lover practically became a part of the family, which is kind of interesting. Another couple of quotes, and I'm going to talk about his writing a little bit. Suffering is what brings us towards happiness. And another quote I think is interesting. Pity was a surprise to God. It was not his invention. And this is all reflected in his writing. His writing has a kind of a bitter humor. There's a lot of self-mockery, and at the same time, his writing is very forgiving. These people who are suffering kind of forgive the others. It's kind of like, it's like you become part of your captives. You respect them, kind of like Patty Hearst. Anyway, he said that all men are Jews, which was his metaphor really for the concept of alienation, suffering, and moral compulsion to make the best of your lives within the limitations of the human existence. It's kind of a moral, to him. It was kind of a moral compulsion to I don't know, to work for some kind of salvation of yourself and maybe others. And he thought that the two were, one was not possible without the other, and that it showed in the writing where the Jewish social context, even though his novels were not about Jews, the context was sometimes very Jewish, referring to show the context of Jews suffering in Gentile surroundings. And I know the assistant was very much like that, and the fixer certainly was very much like that. The fixer kind of, to me, was kind of Kafkaesque in that, you really didn't know why he was arrested. In the fixer, a Jewish man who isn't Jewish anymore, he's passing as a Gentile, he gets arrested for a crime and is held in jail for a couple of years. I should have really gone over some of these novels, which, Rabbi, I got to admit, I think I read some of them before you were born, and haven't read them since. But I've always remembered, the kind of the essence of the suffering. It was always very, very, very graphic.
Maybe time to read them again.
Yeah, probably because I was young and impressionable. Not really sure. So that's pretty much it. I mean, he wasn't prolific. I think he wrote 8 novels and about 50 short stories. He won several National Book Club awards, but never a Pulitzer. And he, at the end, of his life, he was considered a great writer. Anyway, I think that's about it. Without going into details, I think that's the essence of him of his writing is the Jewish experience, the suffering, and it's the suffering that he experienced as a child, and how you get around it and live a life. I think that's an important. Lesson, actually. So, anyway, that's what I have to say.
So great. So we again, these were all. I mean, again, these are all. I mean, if you people know your name, you've made it, and all of these have made it in one way or the other. But we're going to continue this next week, so at least one more week. So for next week, we have listed then, and I'm going to just see who went already and who didn't. We have Karen with Philip Roth, Larry with Saul Bellow, Jane with Naomi Reagan, me with Shai Agnon and Isaac Bashevis Singer, and Jeff with Isaac Asimov. Does anybody else have anybody they'd like to do for next week?
Who did you say Karen had?
She has Philip Roth.
Okay.
We got Philip Roth, Saul Bellow.
Just a reminder.
Yeah, 2 of the most famous 20th century, and then Shai Agnon and of course Isaac Asimov and Singer. So 2 Nobel Prize winner there next week. But does anybody want to take anybody else? Anybody want to take?
Do you want Anita Diamant?
Yeah. Do you want to do that one, Judy?
I can do so. Yeah, my sister actually knows her. She
Perfect.
was from the Boston area, used to come to their meetings and speak. Yeah, I'll do her. Yeah, I loved her.
Perfect. And then did we do Michael Chabon already? We did him already, right? No, maybe.
I don't remember if anyone did him.
Anybody wants to do Shalom Aleichem? We don't have, which is obviously.
I have a question as you're talking about this. Are there any non-Jewish writers who somehow emotionally, let me put it that way, are really Jewish writers? I'm thinking perhaps of Thomas Cahill.
Yeah.
In that sense.
I sometimes get him and Thomas Friedman mixed up. But yeah, he's certainly someone you would think with more of the, historical fiction. But we could do Thomas Cahill as well. Other people who've written on Jewish subjects who are not Jewish could be something for the week after.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see it. Authors, non-Jewish. Let's see here.
I can take a swipe at, I can't remember his name. The Cavalier and Clay.
Michael Chabon.
Chabon. Okay. Do we have Jonathan Safran on the list?
We do not. That's another good you do that.
It's one of my favorite books.
Absolutely.
Everything is illuminated. And
that's one of my wife's favorite books as well.
Absolutely. You know who else probably should have been on the list? Shel Silverstein.
One of my favorites. Do you want to do any of those?
I just said I do Chabon, so.
Okay, so do Michael Chabon.
You want me to do Shel instead of Anita Diamant or no?
No, I think Anita Diamant is one that, is really resonating.
I have to tell you a very funny story about Shel Silverstein. My son adored him. I mean, lived to read those books. And when I was in Israel the first time, I bought him The Giving Tree in Hebrew. And so we knew all the words, so it was a great way to learn some Hebrew. So when Brian one summer lived on Martha's Vineyard, and about 20 guys were in a house, and Shel Silverstein lived about 3 doors up. And Brian said they were in awe. And every night he said he was so strange. He would walk past because he ate at some pizza place. And Brian said they'd all stand on the porch and just look like in awe of him. And I said he was like so weird. And I know he passed away, but we always laugh about it because he came home. He said of all the celebrities he saw in the vineyard, it was Shel Silverstein. That was like, and I thought, well, this is good. The kid likes to read, So
He is one of the few, children's book authors that if I met in a dark alley, I would be very fearful and run away. He
yeah,
looks
well,
very
he said he
menacing.
was weird looking.
Yeah.
And
He's a
very
menacing
funny.
looking guy.
And he
Does
ate
not
the
look like
same
a
pizza
children's
every
story.
night for dinner.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right, so I think that's more than we get on. We got Philip Roth, Karen, Larry, Saul Bello, Naomi Reagan, Jane. If I'll just email this to Rena and to Sheila. I'll do Shagnon and Ivy Singer. Jeff will do Isaac Asimov, Judy Ednia Diamond, and Stuart Michael Chabon. Yes, Harriet, and you're on mute. You're on mute, Harriet. So if you look at the lower left-hand part, if you're on your left hand, you'll see something that says stop,
Okay.
mute, there you go.
Okay,
Perfect.
am I talking now?
Now we
Yes,
can.
okay. Okay. If you want to assign me someone, I'll do someone else.
Great. Would you like to do any of the ones we mentioned?
Yes,
We talked about Jonathan Safran. You want to do him? Or
Okay.
Shalom Aleichem? How about that?
that's fine. Shalom Aleichem.
All right.
Okay.
And then, perfect.
Shalom Rabinovich.
And what did you say?
No, he pulled up someone else.
No, that's it.
No.
You want to do somebody
yeah.
else? Sid, you want to do someone
No.
else?
No, he's fine.
Okay, cool. All right, good. All right, thank you, everybody. That was excellent. It's always interesting to learn about these authors. And, it's hard to know that, Bernard Malamud only wrote 8 books. That's always, seems strange that he is, a lot of short stories, but a lot of these people were short story people. The short story is not as popular now as it was 60, 50 years ago, where it was really part of the vernacular, much more so than today. So that's how Isaac Bashevis Singer and Shai Agnon basically got into won Pulitzer Prizes for their shorts. Won Nobel Prizes more for their short stories, I think, than anything else.
You've got in Savannah, I would say one of the most famous short story writers, in Flannery O'Connor.
Oh yeah, my wife's his house is right a couple
I
of blocks
know.
away.
And she was amazing, but her stories frightened me. I was always afraid I'd meet somebody like the people in her stories. But she was a great writer anyway.
I think they have a Flannery O'Connor Day every year. And one year we dressed up and went to it. So we dressed up in a
Definitely
period
not
costume.
Jewish. So
Not Jewish. No, that
Jewish.
would be surprising. That would be really surprising. But thank you, everybody. I hope everyone has an easy, wonderful new year. We are having our drive-in Sukkot service on Saturday. If you're interested, we just went over and it's really a cool place to do something. So we'll see how it goes. And if you do want lunch, you got to call in today and we'll provide lunch as well.
Okay.
All right, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks to the alligator. And thanks to your invisible husband, Sid.
That was an actual alligator that went across our driveway, and a neighbor of ours took a picture of it.
Nice. What did they capture it and put it somewhere, or did they?
No, he was just moving to a different pond.
Okay. He was moving into the suburbs, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, surprising that he was moving during the day.
yeah.
Well, when you're an alligator, you move whenever you want.
Yes.
And if you hit a golf ball too near, it's the alligators golf.
That's right. Speaking of golf, did you see that video? It went viral. There's a man who lives on next to a golf course, and whenever anybody hits a ball into his little area, he pretends to have been knocked out, and he goes down, closes his eye, and puts the ball right next to his head. And then whenever they come, they see this guy they've knocked out. It's pretty funny. Well, you guys stay safe. It's always a pleasure. I look forward. I'm going to email Rena the list. And again, thank you so much. And we'll see you next week, if not earlier. Stay safe. Shana Tova, all right?
Not so
And
bad.
Chag Sameach for Sukkot. Don't forget to build your sukkah. I'll see you guys later.
Okay.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
guys.
Bye.
Right.